She pressed her palm to the cold marble, whispering, "My hand hurts so much," as if the stone could swallow her pain. Footsteps thundered down the hallway, the kind of stride that becomes a sprint when you're already too late. The door flung open, and a man with rain in his hair and a suit still carrying the city's noise rushed in and shouted, "Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story." The Mitchell house looked like it had never been touched by fingerprints. A view of the lake sat beyond a wall of glass, the water a quiet mirror rehearsing its ripples, the sky a precise gradient an architect could have ordered. Even the lemon polish on the banister smelled expensive. Everything was immaculate, everything except the small, soft hand that hurt. 7-year-old Emily Mitchell kept secrets the way other children kept fireflies, boxed inside, glowing, dying for lack of air. She learned early that silence was a door you lock from the inside. The house taught her that, a palace that hummed with expensive appliances and a curated playlist, a home where every door was soft-closed and every voice, except one stayed low, collected. Daniel Mitchell had built empires out of code, his first million arriving when he still had acne and slept in a sleeping bag under his desk. Now, at 36, he had a skyline office and a watch that could buy a car, but he wore grief like a second skin. People still said, "I'm sorry" to him in elevators, even 12 months later, the way they'd say, "after you" at a door. He had the posture of a man permanently braced against something he hadn't learned to name. He had loved Sarah with a kind, reckless love that made the world brighter. He married her when neither had much money, and then the money came in like a tide. They built a home where Sunday breakfasts were an institution and laughter was currency, and Sarah wrote notes on the fridge to remind Daniel when to kiss his wife and when to unplug from the world. When she died, the house learned to echo differently. Margaret arrived like a warm coat offered in winter, polished, kind when watched, reassuring about things you never knew to fear. People told Daniel it was good to move on. She had a calm, elegant way of placing her hand on his arm and saying, "You don't have to go through this alone." In public, she seemed the salvation of a man sinking in his own success. In private, when the glass breathed and the rooms grew quiet around a little girl, Margaret's voice could turn to ice that left no bruise but made skin flinch. On the day we will return to, the day Daniel shouted, there had been small things that led to it like stepping stones down a dark river. Emily's favourite red ribbon had gone missing. Her purple piano had been put in storage because clutter is unbecoming of a young lady. And at dinner, when she lifted the wrong fork, a hand had closed softly over her wrist and guided it a little too firmly. A smile at Daniel over the top of her head, a whisper to the child, "Gentle hands don't grab, dear. You don't want to be clumsy. Clumsy children break things." Margaret liked the word clumsy. She used it the way other people used names. She had a whole vocabulary for a child: clumsy, dramatic, sensitive, chatterbox, willful. Margaret didn't like chatter. She preferred quiet, composed, grateful. She called it manners, and White whispered it like a lesson that would save the girl's life. The first time Emily said, "My hand hurts so much," it was to the powder blue polar bear she kept hidden under her bed. She told him everything. She told him that sometimes Margaret made her hold her arms up with heavy books until the world swam, that once she squeezed her wrist in a corrective way and told her pain was the map to improvement. She told him that her father had eyes that used to see in colour and now only reflected water. Daniel saw a bruise on Emily's forearm one morning in June. A thin ring, fading yellow like a bracelet you couldn't take off. "How'd this happen, Em?" he asked. The sunlight enhanced his dark circles. His tie hung loose. He had a phone in his hand and a conference in 10. Emily put her hand under the sleeve and shrugged, the universal child gesture for don't make trouble. "I fell," she said. "She tripped in the garden yesterday," Margaret said, arriving with coffee, a lovely splash of cream swirling in something dark and potent. Her nails were neat and pale pink. "We really must get a flatter rake. The groundskeeper doesn't listen," she added lightly, the way a woman speaks to the help in a movie where everyone wears hats. Daniel nodded, already late, already failing this day's test at showing up. "We'll talk tonight," he said to Emily, and then he didn't. He came home after she was asleep, kissed her hair, smelled lemon from the banister and something grey in his own chest. The housekeeper, Anna, who had worked for the Mitchells since before Emily could walk, watched the way a person watches the horizon line for weather. She spoke perfect English in a quiet voice and had a scar on her thumb from a long-ago pan. She'd seen mothers and nannies, cousins and cousins' friends pass through this house. She'd seen Sarah roll dough on the countertop and sing, flower in her hair. She'd watched Margaret remove a child's purple piano to reduce noise. Anna did what immigrant women learn to do around power, disappear just enough to see everything. She began to keep a notebook. Not dramatic things, not the kind you tell a policeman. The ordinary cruelties that slip beneath doors, black pepper in a child's salad when she said it burned her tongue, hands being held a little too long under hot water so she would learn hygienic discipline, a tiny hand placed back on a doorknob and told to hold still as a posture exercise. Anna called Daniel once, with the kind of courage that feels like jumping into a lake at night. "Mr. Mitchell," she said. His voicemail took it. "I think, sir, Emily needs." The beep ended her. He saw it but didn't press play. He sat on the floor of his office with a box of Sarah's journals, drowning in unsent phrases. He had a letter he had never opened. The envelope was in Sarah's writing and the back said, "Daniel, for when you forget who you are." He carried that letter from drawer to drawer the way people carry stones in pockets, hoping weight will keep you grounded. He didn't open it even when he found Emily once in the pantry with her hand under cold water, biting her lip as if she could fix everything alone. "What happened?" he asked. She flinched at his voice, then forced her face smooth and said, "I grabbed the pan wrong. It's okay, Dad." "Let me get ice," he said. His hand hovered, unsure, like a flyer who's forgotten how to land. Margaret appeared and filled the space. "Teach the child to take the pan with a towel," she said, smiling at him like a partner, like a team. "We'll be more careful. Right, Emily?" Emily nodded, an actor through tears. Sarah's handwriting was trees in a storm, certain even when the wind moved her. Daniel finally opened the letter because silence had become uninhabitable. It was a Monday. The lake was a sheet of hammered metal. He opened it late, with whiskey he didn't need and the blinds slatted, the room more shadows than not. "If you are reading this," Sarah wrote, "it means I am not there to tug your sleeve. You get very busy when you're afraid. You always have. You code when I would have cried. I loved that about you, and it scared me because our daughter is a softness you cannot debug. Listen to me. She will not always tell you when it hurts. Watch her hands. She will reach for the world even when it cuts her, and she will hide the blood in her pockets because she thinks that's what love is. Daniel, promise me you will look at her. Look past her smile. Keep your eyes open. You told me once you never wanted to be the kind of man who misses the single most important thing in his life because he was fighting dragons that don't exist. Remember that." Her words did a thing to him, the thing that happens when glass breaks in a path you thought you knew. He read the letter twice, then 3 times, folding it and unfolding it until the paper looked like a map someone had taken into the rain. He went to Emily's room because he couldn't not. She was asleep in a nest of blankets, the polar bear peeking from underneath her pillow. He took her small left hand and very gently turned it palm up. There were red marks around the wrist, a curved bruise like a crescent moon almost faded, and a collection of tiny dots on her palm, the kind that come from holding something hard too long. He sat on the floor. He stared at the bear and then at the wall and then at the letter he had brought with him. He was not a man who cried easily. He grief cried when Sarah died with a violence that frightened him, and then he hadn't cried since. He cried then, quietly, because a child's wrist should not be permanent with someone else's fingers, because he had promised. He had promised. The next morning he took coffee black and stared long at Margaret over the rim. "I want to talk about Emily," he said. Margaret was butter smooth. "Of course," she said, setting down a magazine about interiors where the living rooms looked like airports. "I've been thinking her posture should be addressed. The piano teacher said." "I didn't know she still had a piano teacher," Daniel said. It came out sharper than he intended. "Once a week. You signed the check, darling," she said, smiling. "If you like, I can copy you on more emails." He looked at her then the way a man might look at a painting he suddenly suspects is a forgery. He tried to find the brushstrokes of cruelty in a face that had seemed so composed. He found sweetness, a practiced humility, a head tilt that promised understanding. He found nothing a jury could convict. "Emily says her hand hurts a lot," he said. "She's growing," Margaret replied. "Children dramatize, she mimics. Sarah was a poet. Your daughter plays at being fragile because she knows it gets attention. We must not reward it. He stood, suffocating. He went to the office and called Jacob. Jacob Prout had been Daniel's friend since high school, when Jacob had saved him from a punch by the football captain with a joke about the legal consequences of concussion. Jacob had gone into law with a sigh, and then found out he was very good at making sure children did not disappear into paperwork. People said if you ever needed one person to remember you were an actual human being, call Jacob. Daniel found him in the courthouse parking lot eating almonds because he'd forgotten lunch. "She's hurting my kid," Daniel said, not bothering with hello. His voice had gravel in it. "I think she's hurting my kid and I didn't see it and I don't know how to. What do I do?" Jacob flung the almond back into its bag with the kind of precision righteous anger gives to small tasks. "We document," he said, already moving. "We don't accuse, we don't tip our hand. We gather paper and voices. We get Child Protective Services involved if we must. We call Frank." Sheriff Frank Dalton looked like a grandfather in a country song until you saw the way he stood in crises. He had known Sarah. She had taught his niece art at the community centre. Frank still remembered Daniel, young and dazzled, carrying paint cans for Sarah's mural the first summer of their marriage, saying, "I don't know if anyone is supposed to be this happy." "Come by the station," Frank told him when Jacob put Daniel on speaker. "What I can do is this: I can talk to you about what qualifies as harm, I can talk options, I can tell you what cameras you are legally allowed to put in your own damn house. And then I can make sure nobody in my department fumbles this because you're Daniel Mitchell, which can mean either everything or nothing depending on the day." Understood. That night, Anna found a small camera in a shipping box labelled Home Security Upgrade outside the pantry door. It was a camera like a smoke detector, innocuous and white. "I need your help," Daniel told her, eyes raw in the way of a man who isn't sleeping. "So does Emily. I'm sorry I haven't, I'm sorry." Anna took the camera silently. "I thought you'd never see," she said. She knew where to place it, where to angle it so it captured the corridor that led to the mudroom where a child had once been told to stand still until she learned patience, and the kitchen where hot water hissed, and the hallway lined with framed philanthropic awards that did nothing to absorb the sound of a small voice saying, "I'm sorry," to air. They put microphones in 3 places the law would permit: the entryway, the kitchen, and the hallway leading to Emily's room. They weren't allowed in bathrooms or bedrooms. "We need to respect privacy until we don't," Jacob said. He provided a teddy bear with a removable battery back. "Do not put this near the bed," he reminded Daniel. "But let him sit on a chair. The law is clear, we cannot be. Don't become what you're fighting." Daniel nodded, sickened that he was plotting for evidence in his own house. He tucked Sarah's letter into his wallet like a talisman. He intended to be careful with what it kept alive inside him. The first week recorded nothing that would go to court. There was Margaret's soft voice in the hallway telling Emily she'd taken too long to put her shoes on. There was the clink of forks and a faint, "Don't make faces, you're not 3. The second week there was the sound of water running, hot, left running too long, and a little noise, nothing, a wounded animal suppressed. "Hold it properly," Margaret said to Emily in the kitchen on a Tuesday, a smile in her tone. "Hold the towel properly this time so you don't become your mother, clumsy and dreamy and gone." "Don't say that," Emily whispered. "I'm teaching you to be strong," Margaret said. "Strong girls have disciplined hands." There was the sound of a soft slap, not on skin, the air. The audio captured a hiss, a kettle, a child's breath clipped. The video's angle showed only the curve of Margaret's shoulder. Not enough. "We need more," Jacob said, jaw hard. "We need one instance that forbids ambiguity, or we need a witness who will break in court and tell the truth." Anna, who had been steady as rope, put her notebook on the kitchen island like a sacrificial offering. "I write everything," she said. "I don't know what's admissible, but I write." On Thursday morning, Daniel opened the door to his office and found a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was a printed screenshot of an email thread he had never seen, from Margaret to his brother Richard. "Transfers must move by month end," the email read. "He trusts me. If he notices, we can say it was an auto-execute. The trustee paperwork is waiting." Daniel's stomach dropped. He thought of Richard's face, his brother with the easy smile that had always won him sympathy, and sentences that began with "Danny, be reasonable." Richard, who had failed at 2 startups and 1 marriage in 3 years, and had smiled his way into the corner office of Daniel's company as head of special projects, because blood excuses what competence should not. Richard, who had handled some of Sarah's medical bills when Daniel's world dissolved, so Daniel left him more power than a brother with debt should ever hold. He went to Jacob again. Jacob's jaw did something different. "We have a motif," he said. "Abuse of the child and intended abuse of power. Margaret is not just cruel, she's opportunistic. Your brother is not just a failure, he's a hazard. They will circle one another if it profits them. We can use this, but not if you blow it by storming around the house. Do you hear me? You will be careful, you will be surgical." "Frank," Jacob added, "we need a trap." "I don't like that word," Frank said, "but I like what it does." "Okay, we can stage an event, keep officers near, get an emergency judge on call for a protection order. You hold a dinner, something important. You leave something unsigned that triggers Margaret's fuse. She's controlled, we need to accelerate. People like that break when they think their plan is threatened." Daniel thought of Saturday night. They had a fundraiser for Sarah's art room at the community centre. Margaret had positioned herself as chair to keep herself near Daniel's orbit in the press. It was perfect and vile. "Saturday," he said. "There are nights you never forget down to the temperature of the air." The evening carried a hint of rain, the lake disruptive, little waves like whispers. The house glowed. People in silk moved through rooms saying, "So generous and tragic and inspirational." Daniel wore a tux because there are costumes for every kind of war. He stood near the glass listening to people tell him what his wife would have wanted as if she had given them memos. Emily wore a yellow dress Sarah had chosen before she got sick. Anna had kept it, just in case. In the dress, Emily looked like a sunbeam you could hold. She stuck very near the piano in the corner and touched the keys with her good hand and did not play. Margaret floated. She was good at it. Photographers captured her chin angled toward Daniel, a hand on his arm, a step behind him so you could fit a halo in if you wanted. She might have been anything on a magazine cover, the salvation of a grieving genius, the new life angle. Richard looked very good that night. The suit did most of the work. He had a whiskey he pretended was the first, and he laughed at jokes with his head back like a man who collects good fortune. The tea of the plan was simple: a folder on Daniel's desk, a signed grant to the community centre, a blank space where he was supposed to sign a transfer from Emily's trust that Margaret had proposed as streamlining. Daniel left the signature line empty. He left the office light on. He let the anxiety hum, for him genuine, for Margaret bait. And he made sure that the little polar bear sat on a chair just outside the office door, his nose angled toward the hallway. All night the cameras watched. People drank champagne and said things like, "For the children," in rooms where a child had been told not to cry because it made her nose red. Anna moved through the crowd with a tray like a ghost with very good posture. At 9:12 p.m., Margaret took the folder and took herself down the hallway with a smile only one camera saw. She stood in Daniel's office in her bare feet because she hated the sound of heels scratching wood. She looked at the signature line, the absence of Daniel's name. She read the grant amount and the trust transfer side by side. She saw them like a seesaw, this balances that. Her mouth thinned. Her eyes flicked to the security camera, off she had thought because she had insisted Daniel disable office cams while entertaining. He had disabled one and left another. She called Richard. The microphone captured his. "Just sign it, what's he going to do? He trusts you." "We need to discuss this later," she said, and then she did something even Daniel had not anticipated. She went to find Emily. The child was not where she was supposed to be. Her father had told her to stay by the piano. She had obeyed, mostly. She had slipped into the hallway to watch the lights reflected in the lake and to breathe air that did not have sugar and perfume in it. She stood near the office, because that is where you go when adult voices feel like weather. Margaret found her there and took her hand in a grip that was meant to be instructive. "Graphic harm is mercifully beyond your eyes here. What matters is the sound the audio caught, the intake of breath, the word O turned into O to look like nothing, and Margaret saying, 'Quiet. You will always ruin things.'" "Margaret," Daniel's voice cut through the hallway like glass thrown. Cameras capture moments designed to be misremembered. This one had angles. His face, storm, realization, something like love weaponized. He did not think. He moved. He did not see Jacob step out of the den to the left or Sheriff Frank's plainclothes deputy at the far door. He went to his knees to make his face level with his daughter's. He lifted her hand with the kind of care that made his own fingers shake. He said, too loudly because he had been quiet too long. Emily, I'm here. Margaret's smile turned into a shape made for strangers. She ran in the hallway, she said, already defending herself to the future. She tripped. She always. Don't, Daniel said, his voice lower now, a command he had never used on anyone he loved. The cameras would later show the exact moment a man puts himself between a child and everything. She is dramatic, Margaret said. Daniel, this is ridiculous. Stop, he said, and it was the first time he had used that word and meant it outside a boardroom. He looked at Emily, really looked. Her eyes looked like Sarah's at 6 to the degree that made his throat obliterate. He saw fear like a flat ocean. My hand hurts so much, she whispered then, because in the center of a party, truth sometimes forgets its disguise. Not anymore, he said. He said it with certainty like a promise that drags every other promise with it. He stood between Margaret and Emily and turned his face to the woman he had brought into his home and said with the controlled rage of a man who decided not to be complicit, "If you ever touch my daughter again, I will remove you from this house and from any place that might get you near her. Do you understand me?" Margaret's face changed then. Some people are not as good at acting when the audience is won. There was flicker and then flatness, and then she let slip a sentence that would become a hinge. "You won't do anything, you never can, that's why she's easy." The deputy stepped forward then, like a cue, and the room remembered itself as theatre, players and marks. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need you to step away." Margaret turned that famous charming smile toward him. "Do you know who I am?" "I do," he said. He looked at Daniel. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like to make a statement?" "I would like to get my daughter safe," Daniel said. His voice shook. He felt something old break in him, the peace that thinks anger makes you an animal, that you must always be mild. He handed the deputy the flash drive Jacob had pressed into his palm with the first week of recordings. He handed him Anna's notebook. He handed him Sarah's letter because that, too, was evidence not for court, but for the world. The deputy took them. He nodded at Jacob. Jacob moved, already calling the emergency judge, the one who owed him a poker debt and a favor in the shape of speed. Sheriff Frank was on his way. The party kept moving in the other rooms as if nothing had splintered. People took pictures and posted hashtags. The glass breathed. By midnight, the house had new inhabitants, the kind of police you don't want to be on a first-name basis with, and the kind of lawyers who call you sweetheart and then crush your enemies politely. Margaret was escorted out to de-escalate, and in that calm voice of hers, she said she would be calling her counsel, and that this was hysteria. She left with her shoes in her hand and turned once at the door to say, "You're making a mistake, Daniel. That child will drown you." Daniel gathered Emily up. She was 7, she weighed a summer storm. She put her face into his shirt and breathed him in and said, "Are you mad at me?" He said, "I am mad at myself." He tucked her names into what he said, Emily, and little bird, all the names he'd forgotten to use because grief had built him a fortress. "I'm not mad at you, I'm sorry." Jacob came in with a paper already filling. "Judge Albright signed an emergency protective order," he said. "Margaret is barred from contact. CPS will assign a caseworker in the morning. We also got a temporary restraint on the trust movements so nobody can touch Emily's funds. Richard might try, he will fail. And good news, I've got Frank getting a warrant for Richard's devices." "Daniel, breathe." Daniel exhaled like a man surfacing. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't enough. He didn't have enough words for the men who had remembered how to be his friends. At 2 a.m., Richard tried to slip down the back staircase with a laptop in his bag. Anna saw him because she didn't sleep much on nights when the house had changed its shape. She told Frank's deputy like someone telling the rain that the roof is open. They stopped Richard at the mudroom, his face a study in offended innocence. "I came for my jacket," he said. "Find a jacket in your closet," the deputy said, unimpressed. "Hand me the bag." Richard smiled with his teeth. "Do you have a warrant? Do you want to be seen resisting a lawful search while your niece sits upstairs with a bandaged hand?" the deputy asked pleasantly. Richard handed over the bag. Inside, a ledger that made accountants whistle low, a flash drive with a neat label that said consulting, and a little paper with a password written in Margaret's handwriting. People who believe themselves untouchable often forget operational security. By morning, Margaret's lawyer sent an email threatening suit. By lunchtime, Richard's accounts were frozen pending a fraud investigation. By dinner, CPS had met with Emily and Anna, had listened to a child describe lessons and holding still, had seen the marks on a hand that should have been learning chords, not caution. They spoke to Daniel quietly in the room with the lemon-polished banister. "We keep her with you," the caseworker said. "We will monitor. You will be observed, but we keep her with you." That night, Daniel tucked Emily into bed in a guest room. Their own rooms felt contaminated. He sat on the floor beside her with a guitar he had not picked up since Sarah's funeral and played a song he had written when Emily was a baby, about a lighthouse and a girl who found it in fog. He played badly, hands unpracticed, and Emily laughed the first laugh he had heard from her without a flinch inside it in months. "Play it again," she said. So he did. There are nights you measure in lullabies, not in minutes. He played until his fingers hurt, and her good hand reached over the side of the bed and found his shoulder. "I remember this," she said, and fell asleep in the middle of the not remember, because bodies remember what minds forget. Courtrooms are made of wood and paper and people pretending they are not made of feelings. The judge in their case, the Honourable Anita Albright, had a gaze that could find your fourth-grade self in the answers you gave her. Margaret's lawyer wore cufflinks that probably had a story. Richard came in with a haircut that cost more than Daniel's first computer and a suit he should have spent on morality. Jacob stood up and did what he does best. He made the narrative make sense without making it melodrama. He presented the audio, Margaret's voice instructing silence, the hiss of water, the sharp intake of breath. He presented Anna's notebook and Anna herself, who stood there in her best dress and told the truth like it was a thing she had practiced all her life. He presented the frozen transfers, the emails that spoke for themselves. He presented Daniel, who did not cry because that is not useful in court, but whose voice wavered exactly once when he said the sentence, "I didn't see and now I do." Margaret's lawyer worked to frame it as discipline. "Many households have rules," he said. "Stand still, don't interrupt, don't touch hot pans, she's 7. Judge Albright picked up the audio transcript and read the line where Margaret said, "You will always ruin things." She looked at Margaret over the rim of her glasses. "What do you think the word discipline is for?" she asked. "Instruction or domination? Because this child is not a wild thing, she is a child." Margaret's mouth made a flat line. "I wanted to improve her," she said, sounding suddenly like a woman who was very tired. Her mother was sentimental, her father is distracted, someone had to teach her grit. Judge Albright nodded slowly, the way someone nods because they have decided. "Grit," she said, "is what children develop when they are safe enough to fail." She issued a permanent protective order. She forbade Margaret from coming within 200 yards of Emily's school, home, or piano. She ordered an evaluation for Margaret and a prohibition from contact, until further notice. Margaret's charm broke then. She said something under her breath about money and hysteria, and stormed out with her lawyer whispering scorch marks behind her. Richard's hearing was different. Numbers and ethics do a different dance. He was charged with attempted fraud, misappropriation, and conspiracy to commit. Jacob found a line he liked and held onto it all morning. "You borrow what you cannot pay from family, you do not steal it from a child." Richard glared at him like a brother who had been betrayed. The judge set trial for a later date and an ankle monitor for now. When Richard looked back as they cuffed him, he looked like a kid again. Daniel felt a complicated sadness and did not look away. CPS made a plan. Daniel would undergo family counseling. He would attend parenting classes not because he had failed at love, but because he had failed at noticing, and that is a kind of skill you can improve. A guardian ad litem was appointed to watch over Emily's interests. The house learned to sound differently because people who came over now had voices that asked instead of told. Frank stopped by with a puzzle once and did it wrong on purpose, so Emily could correct him. Dr. Helen Rasmussen sat on the carpet with Emily in a room that had sand trays and figurines and a dollhouse. She was the kind of therapist kids instinctively like because she didn't ask questions so much as hold spaces. "Do you want to tell me a story?" she asked, and Emily did not answer. She made a family out of toy giraffes and put the mother giraffe behind a little brick wall and then knocked the wall down and put a polar bear in the front yard like a sentry. She found the piano again. She began to press the white keys first because black ones felt like untold things. The first song she taught herself she called Lakewater. It was a simple line of notes that went up when you thought it would go down, a question that kept choosing not to fall. Daniel found a piano teacher who was gentle and odd in the best way, a man who believed mistakes in music are just new songs being born. The teacher told Emily she could write with her hands what she didn't want to say with her mouth. She did. Healing didn't look like one of those time-lapse videos where flowers open. It looked like missing a therapy appointment because she didn't want to go that day, and then going the next. It looked like Daniel learning to check his phone only after she fell asleep, and then learning not to at all in those hours. It looked like Daniel apologizing without an explanation. It looked like Anna staying and being given the power of veto over schedules because she was the one who had kept this house from becoming a museum of harm. It looked like a new ritual. Every Sunday, they climbed the small hill behind the house and flew kites. Red ones, because that was Sarah's favorite color. Emily learned to let the string go and pull it back, to feel the wind without fighting it. Daniel learned the physics of letting go and the theology. He kept Sarah's letter folded in his wallet until the edges wore down, and then he laminated it because he was no longer superstitious about keeping the patient alive by not changing anything. He started something because building is how he breathes. Sarah's window, he called it, a foundation for abused children and the adults who loved them. He didn't want his money to be just an apology, he wanted it to be architecture, rooms where kids could practice not flinching. He partnered with the community centre Sarah had poured paint into, and with Frank's office, because justice needs both a desk and a pair of boots. He funded scholarships for child advocates like Jacob to work cases for families who were made of courage and not cash. He learned to be on panels where no one said innovative and people said necessary. Margaret stayed angry in a house across town with curtains always drawn. She tried to get colleagues to attend to her suffering. They nodded at her in coffee shops and then later said to one another, "I didn't know." She posted carefully cropped photos of her face looking like a saint. She moved out of their town 6 months later. She married a man who liked how she looked in company. Sometimes people do not change, sometimes they just move. Richard tried to be a villain and found he was a cautionary tale. He pled to a combination of charges, paid back what he could, and went to a facility that had a garden and a lot of time. In letters he sent Daniel that Daniel read only sometimes. Richard said things like, "I didn't mean," and "you know I always loved him." Daniel's replies were short and boring because that is sometimes what boundaries sound like. Emily grew. She stopped apologizing to furniture when she bumped into it. She learned to put her hand out in class when she wanted to answer. She made a friend who liked frogs. She liked the way frogs folded themselves like paper in the grass. She learned to ask for ice for her hand when it hurt because sometimes pain does not evaporate with the story, sometimes it lingers and reminds you of old lessons. She played piano almost every day. She wrote a song called Practice, in which the melody made the same mistake 3 times before it found its way. Her teacher cried. On the anniversary of Sarah's death, Daniel took Emily down to the lake at dawn. They brought flowers because some rituals are true if they feel true. He told Emily about the time Sarah drove them 3 hours to see a field of sunflowers, and it turned out the sign was outdated and the field was a mall. Sarah made them park and eat ice cream in the parking lot to give the day what it needed. Emily laughed. "That sounds like Mom," she said, and the way she said Mom, like a gift she wasn't afraid to open, broke him in a good way. "Do you remember her hands?" he asked softly. Emily looked at her own. She put one hand over the other the way Sarah used to when she was thinking. "Yes," she said. "They were soft and they didn't mind if I spilled." A pause. "I want mine to be like that." "They already are," he said. He took her hurt hand in both of his and kissed the wrist where skin is thin. The lake threw light back at them like a blessing. Epilogue, the concert the room wasn't fancy and that felt right. The community centre had scuffed floors and a brand new piano courtesy of Sarah's window. The recital programme had a line that read "Original Piece by Emily Mitchell," which made Daniel's throat convert into a fist. People sat in chairs with dents in them, the kind of plastic that lasts through years of laughter and a few tears. Daniel sat in the second row with Anna to his right and Jacob to his left, Frank behind them with his niece who had started art again. The judge was there, because sometimes judges come to see how stories end. The children played their little scales, their careful songs. Then it was Emily's turn. She was taller now in the way of children who are not quite there yet. She wore a dress that was not yellow but had yellow in it. She did not look for her father, she knew where he was. She sat at the piano and put her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for 1, 2, 3 breaths. She played. The piece began with the cluster of 4 notes she had learned when she was small. It climbed and then refused to fall. It made a detour around a chord that would have been easy and chose the harder one, the one that landed a little to the left, unexpectedly right. Halfway through, she paused, a measured pause you could fit a lifetime inside, and then she played a note that sounded like a door opening. It was not a perfect performance. 1 note slipped. She smiled and found herself again. Later, her teacher would say, "You wrote hope into that," and she would shrug and say, "I just played what my hands remembered." Later, Daniel would ask her the name, and she would think for a second and say, "Promise." He closed his eyes and saw Sarah on a summer day, a kite red enough to tell the sky where they were. He saw Emily holding the string, learning to let the wind have its life without letting it take her. He saw a house that had been glass and became a home, fingerprints and all. People stood up and clapped, not because she was perfect, but because she was alive in her own skin. Daniel stood last, like a man who had been given back his days and learned to tell time a new way. When Emily came to him afterward, she ran and he caught her, and it felt like forgiveness pressed into bone. There are stories where fathers shout to be heard. There are stories where fathers learn that their shout is not the thing that saves anyone, it's the listening. Daniel had shouted in a hallway because shouting was all that would cut through that moment. He learned to talk softer and stand closer. He kept his promise, the one Sarah had written into his pocket. On the way home, the lake was quiet. The glass walls reflected them back not as a display but as a family. Anna put leftovers in the fridge and labelled them because love has handwriting. Jacob made a joke about bad almond habits, and Frank said he'd learned to like piano. The night settled into itself. Emily put her hand in Daniel's and did not pull away. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, you don't have to play the guitar tonight," she said mischievously. "But can we read the one about the lighthouse?" He smiled. "We can read it twice," she nodded. "Okay." Upstairs, the polar bear sat on a shelf looking out the window, a sentinel watching a life rearrange around it. Downstairs, by the lemon-polished banister, a small smudge finally refused to be wiped away. It belonged to a child's hand. It belonged to a history that would not again be denied. When Emily said, years later, to a child of her own, "My hand hurts so much," it was because she had practiced a piece too long. She ran her hand under cool water and laughed at the memory embedded there. A hallway, a shout, and then a life that walked itself back from the edge. She kissed her child's fingers and said the words she had waited to hear, learned to speak, and then used to build a home, "Not anymore, I'm here."